My guest at this time is the co-host for the new podcast, The Extreme Life of Matt Hardy. It debuts this Friday on all podcast platforms as part of the Podcast Heat Network. It's our good friend, Jon Alba. Jon, welcome back to the Wrestling Inc. Daily.
Man, it's so great to be chatting with you, Nick. Happy New Year to you. I appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Yeah, no problem. So this is very exciting. You had a very busy end to 2021. You joined ad-free shows formally, a couple months ago?
Yeah, back in end of September, early October was when I officially started with Conrad and the team, and it's been baptism by fire since, and adding shows on top of what I have over on the ad-free shows platform with the Podcast Heat Network. It's just a crazy, crazy time that I'm trying to wrap my head around. And I think right now, between the shows that I have out and the shows that I have in development, because there are a couple in development too, it's like 4 or 5 different programs that are long form stuff. So it's been wild.
Yeah, so you make the choice here to throw one more show onto the pile because we can get to all the stuff you're doing with ad-free shows here in just a little bit. How do you and Matt Hardy come to the decision to launch a podcast together, Jon?
Yeah, so it was about maybe 3 years ago or so. I just kind of had a random thought in my head. And being such a big fan of Conrad's podcast, I was like, what would a Matt Hardy podcast sound like? Because I don't know about you, but growing up, Matt Hardy and the Hardy Boys they were my guys. And Matt Hardy especially was, for some reason, like everyone took to Jeff, but Matt in particular, I always felt like he was kind of the secret sauce of the Hardy Boys. He just was that little extra something, the steak and the sizzle that made him stand out to me. And I really identified with his career, especially as it went on. And he's dealing with overcoming so much adversity. I think it's a great story of redemption. So I was like, what would a Matt Hardy podcast sound like? And I kind of had an idea in my head, but I never really had a platform. And then once I got this new gig here with Conrad's team, the wheels start to come in motion. I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to pitch this to Matt. He had followed me on Twitter like maybe 8-9 months before. And I made the pitch to him. I said, if you are even remotely interested, all I need is 5 minutes of your time and give me a call. And 3 weeks later, he called me and 5 minutes is all it took. He said, I'm interested. We had lunch at a Chipotle near where a taping of Dynamite was being held. We were only supposed to meet for like maybe an hour. It was like 2.5 hours, and we banged out an entire year worth of shows. So I'm so excited here as we get the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy going. We've taped 1 episode already as we record this interview, you and I, and we're set to record episode 2 in a couple days.
So when you say you banged out, all these shows, you mean like the schedule here, right? The plan.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily like this week we're going to do this week we're going to do this, but we have like a full year's worth of ideas for content.
I gotcha. So will this be similar to what people have become accustomed to with like Conrad style, where it's very much the book you can pull off the shelf? We're going to be talking about this particular match or pay-per-view each week. Is that the plan?
So I think the biggest thing that you can do when you're trying to start a podcast right now is come up with ways that you can be different, because there's so much oversaturation, especially when you talk about Conrad's podcast. And the way that I look at it is it takes inspiration from Conrad's podcast in that each episode will generally be centered around something that happened in the past. But what I love that we have the fluidity of being able to do with the show is it connects the past to the present, because Matt's not afraid to talk about the present. Whereas you see a lot of nostalgia podcasts are strictly talking about what happened in 1999. Well, okay, we're going to talk about the No Mercy ladder match in 1999 in our first episode. But throughout the episode, we're going to look directly at how did this match shape wrestling as we know it today. And in the process, Matt is not unwilling to break down the walls of kayfabe and talk about wrestling psychology. How do we get into laying a match out that looks like this ladder match? How do we make things make sense to get from point A to point B? So we're really focusing on bridging the past to the present. I thought Matt, with everything that he's gone through in his career and been in a part of so many different organizations, that would be essential. We needed to talk about today. And here, I'll even drop you a little exclusive here on Wrestling Inc. Okay?
Yeah.
Episode 2, well, episode 1's about the No Mercy ladder match. Episode 2 is about the current AEW World Heavyweight Champion, Hangman Page.
Okay.
So we are going right from past to present immediately and talking about Matt has known Hangman for a while, and we're going to delve into the psychology of how Hangman Page became who he is today and what Matt was able to pick up from working with him.
Huh. Interesting. So, what are some of the periods you're most excited about talking about, though, when you look at Matt's career?
So obviously the TLC era that's the prime everything when it comes to the Hardy Boys, right? Like that's what everyone identifies with. So we'll talk about that stuff. But for me, when it comes to pro wrestling, what I'm so enamored with is character development and storytelling. And when you're talking about Matt Hardy's career, that's the broken Matt character, and
Right.
that's the pursuit of all the different tag team championships, the Expedition of Gold that they had leading up to the WrestleMania 33 return in WWE. I'm so excited for that. But we're going to talk about Omega Pro Wrestling that laid the ground for so many people in that area. We're going to talk about overcoming addiction and overcoming internal struggles. And another thing too is Jeff's story is so much ingrained in Matt's.
Right.
So I think people are going to get an understanding of who Jeff is just as much as they will with Matt too.
Well, and Jeff, I guess, spoiler alert, he's going to be a part of the first episode this Friday. Did you expect that? Did you expect that? How did that come about?
I had no idea. I did all the research and prep and had everything ready to go for this show. And it was just for Matt. And I had given Jeff an open invite to come on whenever he wants. He's a huge part of Matt's story. And I get a text as we're starting. Matt's like, I may have to get the door at some point. I was like, okay, no problem. And then he's like, can we stop for a second? I got to let someone in. And there's Jeff. And
wow,
I'm not kidding you when I say this. The 45 minutes that Jeff is on this show, we break down the match in detail, the ladder match.
Yeah.
It is some of the most insightful and wholesome pro wrestling podcast content you will ever hear in your life. The genuine excitement that Jeff had in breaking this historic match down with his brother was so heartwarming and so insightful. And you're going to hear everything. You're going to hear how the seesaw spot was invented with the ladders. You're going to hear just amazing stuff that a lot of these other podcasts haven't been willing to go to. They haven't been willing to break those barriers down. The idea, Nick, is we are trying to be educational, not just for a fan, but for future workers too, or today's generation of talent, where they can learn about pro wrestling psychology and storytelling and character development from Matt Hardy.
So how did Jeff look and sound? I know a lot of people obviously very concerned about Jeff right now.
Jeff, to me, sounded great and awesome. And I asked him how he's doing and everything, and you'll hear what he has to say. I want to make it clear we don't talk about in this episode what happened with Jeff in WWE. That this was not the platform for that or the time or place. I imagine at some point Jeff will address that when he's ready to. And he has an open invite to do that on the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy. But this what you're going to hear from Jeff is about the No Mercy ladder match and how he's doing right now, which I think everyone's been concerned how he's doing. And from my observation, he's in a really good place. And I know he's really excited about his music career that he's going to start trying to take off again and do some live shows, which is pretty cool. And actually, spoiler too, another exclusive for Wrestling Inc. The theme song for the podcast is Obsolete by Jeff Hardy, which he was using briefly in Impact, but very briefly. And I was like, this song is too much of a banger not to give attention to. So that is the theme song for the podcast.
Well, that worked out well. And how is it for you? Are you more or less stressed working with somebody who is actively in the business of professional wrestling right now?
Matt Hardy is the single easiest person I've ever worked with in any capacity of anything in my entire life. And I'm not BSing you when I say that. That is the wholehearted truth. He has been so open to ideas and collaborative and kind and insightful. It's been amazing. And I've gotten to know Matt now as a friend. And that has been the coolest thing for me as a kid that grew up wearing the neon green and purple t-shirts. And now he's someone that I can call a friend. And I approached him with this idea back in the beginning of October, I think.
Sure.
And we just hit it off immediately. And I think you're going to hear that camaraderie come across right away. I will say this, because he's in the backwoods of North Carolina, we had some technical issues in the beginning of this podcast because, I mean, he is out in the boondocks. But we did end up getting things to work as the podcast went along. And we're actually taping episode 2 in person together this week while AEW is in Newark.
Have you been to the compound yet, John?
I have not been to the compound yet. I really would love to get to the compound at some point soon, though.
Okay, fair enough. So with the while we got some time here at the end, tell me a little bit of ad-free shows. How did this come about, man? You're doing a lot of really fun and different stuff over at that platform right now.
Yeah, it's been awesome. And I kind of made the decision that I was going to be leaving where I was in Orlando back maybe around April of last year. And I didn't really know what the next step was going to be. I was like, if I'm going to stay in local news, maybe it'll be in these markets, New York, Boston, Philly, DC, but you got to have the right jobs available too. And then you got to try to get that job. And the opportunities weren't really there. And then it was around that time I got a call from Conrad and he was like, hey, I got an idea. Like, what would you think about coming in and hosting some shows on ad-free shows and some other projects that I have in the works?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, that'd be cool. I got to see if it works with like my news contracts, but okay. And we hung up. And then I had that realization. I was like, oh, I think he meant coming on full time. like I think that's what he meant. So, Nick, it was kind of one of those things where you bet on yourself, right? And I always told myself that I would leave local news if it meant getting to work in baseball full time or pro wrestling full time in a role that I'd feel confident in. And ad-free shows plus podcast heat have been so fulfilling. I've got a Pardon the Interruption style debate show with Danny Cage, the owner of the Monster Factory, called Up for Debate. It's super cool. I have my one-on-one interview show, which has been such a blast because long-form interviewing is really my passion. So that's been so much fun. And I hope that people take that away from the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy is you're going to see a form of interviewing that is very much based in humanity. It's based on asking follow-up questions. And I think you're going to really like the flow that will come out of it. And that will make it different than a lot of the podcasts you hear out there today.
So, yeah, take us home here, John. Where can people go find The Extreme Life of Matt Hardy? Where do you want to send them here to check it out this Friday?
Sure. So you can find it literally anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere. And also on YouTube, Matt Hardy Brand, which is his personal YouTube account. The full episodes will be going up there and eventually with video as well. So you'll get to see us there. I ask you guys, check out this show. It's going to be similar, but also very different than anything you've listened to. And you're going to get transparency from wrestling, which transparency is not always a big part of wrestling. So you know that firsthand, Nick. It's
tough.
Reporting on it is really tough. So I hope people love this. And a little teaser here, you're not done. There's going to be some more big time podcast projects that are going to be announced soon. So we're ready to go, man. And I'm so excited. I hope people enjoy the show on Friday.